May 1943. The North Atlantic is black, cold, and wide enough to swallow whole fleets. Somewhere out there, a German U-boat sends a short, coded burst back to headquarters at Lorient. We're under attack. Our position is blown. Help. Then the radio goes dead. On that boat, the crew had been doing something boring but necessary, routine weather reports, when British destroyers suddenly showed up from a direction they had no business knowing to check. And the moment the U-boat tried to dive, the first depth charges were already splashing down like the British had a map to the exact spot. Back at German Naval Command, officers replayed the reports with a growing, uncomfortable question. How are the British always there? Because this wasn't a one-off. Convoy escorts kept turning up right where U-boats were gathering. RAF Coastal Command aircraft kept finding submarines in huge stretches of ocean where a lucky sighting should have been rare. In the U-boat war, luck matters, but not like this. So Admiral Karl Dönitz ordered people to check the one thing that was supposed to make all of this impossible: Enigma. If you've ever heard Enigma described as unbreakable, that's not just hype. German cryptographers believed it completely. They inspected it, stress-tested it, ran the math again and again. The number of possible daily settings was so massive it sounded like a joke. Hundreds of quintillions of combinations. Even if an enemy grabbed an Enigma machine, the Germans argued, it would still be useless without the exact daily key. In their minds, Enigma wasn't just secure, it was locked behind the laws of nature, and that confidence shaped the war. Quick favor before we go deeper: if you want WEP stories that separate the real history from the movie version, subscribe and keep notifications on. You're going to want the rest of this one, because years later, a lot of Americans would watch a Hollywood thriller and walk out believing U.S. sailors captured an Enigma machine, cracked Nazi codes, and saved the Atlantic. But in 1943, the truth was already written, quietly, in the way British ships were dropping depth charges. To understand how big this secret really was, you have to see what Enigma meant to Germany before the shooting started. Enigma wasn't a codebook you could steal and copy. It was a machine. Inside were rotating wheels called rotors, wired so each letter got swapped into another letter. One rotor had 26 positions. Stack 3 rotors together and you get 26 possible starting positions. 17th alpha 76. That sounds big until you realize it's only the opening act. Enigma added more layers. There were ring settings that shifted the wiring alignment, and most important, a plug board on the front that let operators swap letter pairs before and after the rotor scrambling. That plug board is where the combinations exploded into the stratosphere, so when an operator typed a message, the output looked like pure nonsense. And the scary part was this: the encryption changed with every key press because the rotors stepped forward like an odometer. 2 identical letters typed in a row could come out completely different. To read it, you needed another Enigma set up the exact same way. Every day, the German military changed the rotor order, the start positions, the ring settings, and the plug board pairs using key sheets distributed across the armed forces, on U-boats in the Atlantic, in Luftwaffe units, in Army signals rooms across Europe and North Africa. Intercept a message without that day's key, and you weren't almost there. You were nowhere. German signals experts had looked at the problem even before the war and concluded that breaking Enigma by pure analysis would take computing power no country had. In 1939 and 1940, computer mostly meant a human with a pencil. From that perspective, their confidence wasn't crazy. That belief spread through the whole command structure. U-boat packs coordinated attacks by radio. The Army requested supplies and fuel by wireless. The Luftwaffe sent raid details over encrypted traffic. Germany didn't just use Enigma, it leaned on Enigma. It planned operations assuming its messages could be intercepted but never understood. And then, in the English countryside, that assumption started to crack. About 50 miles north of London sat Bletchley Park, a Victorian estate that became the home of Britain's code-breaking operation right before the war. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, people with unusual brains started arriving. Mathematicians, linguists, puzzle addicts, chess players, anyone who could stare at a problem for hours and not blink. Their mission was blunt: break Enigma. The pressure was brutal because the Germans reset Enigma every night at midnight. Even if you had an Enigma machine sitting on your desk, you had only 24 hours to figure out that day's settings. Then the clock reset and yesterday's work became worthless. Trying every possibility by hand wasn't just hard, it was impossible. You could work non-stop for longer than human civilization has existed and still not finish. So a young mathematician named Alan Turing pushed a different idea. Don't try every setting, use logic. If you can guess small pieces of what a message might contain, common phrases, predictable formats, you can test Enigma settings and throw out the ones that create contradictions. You don't need to search the whole ocean. You just need a method that tells you where the fish cannot be. That concept demanded a machine. By early 1940, Turing and fellow codebreaker Gordon Welchman helped design what became the Bombe, an electromechanical monster built to race through Enigma possibilities far faster than any team of humans could. It wasn't sleek. It was loud, heavy, and industrial. Think cabinets of spinning drums that simulated Enigma rotors, churning through settings until the logic finally lined up. When the bomb hit on a potential match, it didn't deliver a full translation. It delivered a candidate. Human operators still had to take that candidate, set up real Enigma machines, and see if the decrypted text turned into actual German. But now, the work was possible inside one day. In May 1940, Bletchley scored a breakthrough against German Air Force traffic. From that point, Britain could sometimes read Luftwaffe messages fast enough to matter. The intelligence stream got a name. Ultra. It became so sensitive that even many Allied commanders didn't know where it came from. Prime Minister Winston Churchill received regular summaries, and the information helped Britain brace for raids and understand German planning. Still, there was a nasty catch. Naval Enigma, the version used by U-boats, was tougher. It had extra complexity, and later the Germans expanded it further with an additional rotor, multiplying the possibilities again. For the Atlantic War, that mattered more than anything. If you could read U-boat messages, you could route convoys away from wolf packs and stop sinkings. If you couldn't, the ocean stayed deadly. So in 1940 and 1941, Britain had a partial victory. Some German networks were readable, but the U-boat war, the war that could starve Britain into surrender, was still hidden behind the strongest locks. And that's where the story turns. Because the final breakthrough wasn't just about clever math. It wasn't even just about building better machines. To crack naval Enigma in time, the codebreakers needed something the Germans guarded with their lives, real, current, key material. And the only place you could reliably get that was inside a U-boat, before it slipped under for good. If you want to picture how naval Enigma finally got cracked, don't imagine one genius having a lightning bolt moment. Imagine a relay race. The first legs were run years before the war even started, by Polish mathematicians who were already studying Enigma when most of Europe still hoped Hitler could be managed. Poland sat in a dangerous spot, and Polish intelligence had strong reasons to worry about German communications. By the early 1930s, Polish cryptographers had made serious progress on Enigma's underlying weaknesses. Their work wasn't some lucky guess. It was deep math, patterns, structure, and a way of thinking about the machine that made it something you could attack, not just fear. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, those Polish codebreakers didn't just vanish. Some escaped. Their research moved west, first to France, then to Britain after France collapsed. And when they arrived, they brought something Britain badly needed: years of theoretical groundwork and practical insight into how Enigma could be approached systematically. That mattered because Bletchley Park wasn't starting from zero. Britain had smart people and urgency, but the Polish head start helped turn impossible into hard but doable. Bletchley's bombs, those clattering electromechanical machines, grew from that combined effort. Theory that identified weaknesses, then engineering that could exploit them at speed. By late 1941, British teams were breaking German Army and Luftwaffe keys often enough to produce real operational intelligence. Not perfectly, not always on time, but regularly. Naval Enigma, though, was still the monster in the room, because the German Navy treated security like life or death, because for them, it was. U-boats had to coordinate across huge distances. Wolf packs needed timing. Headquarters needed to direct submarines toward convoys. Radio traffic was the nervous system of the U-boat war. If that nervous system got red, the whole strategy collapsed, so Germany added complexity, procedures were stricter, and the naval Enigma system became the hardest target. That's why the most decisive help didn't come from a chalkboard, it came from the sea. The codebreakers needed key material, the daily settings and procedures that made intercepted messages readable within the short window when they mattered. That material lived on U-boats in the form of codebooks, key sheets, and instruction manuals. Without those, the bombs were often fighting in the dark, so the war started producing a grim side mission: capture Enigma material before it sank. One early famous case came in May 1941 with U-110. A British destroyer group forced the submarine into trouble and boarded it long enough to seize important items, including Enigma-related material. This wasn't a clean movie-style raid. It was risky, chaotic, and urgent. But it mattered because every real document taken from a U-boat could shave hours or days off the process at Bletchley. Even with captures like that, naval Enigma wasn't a single door that swung open forever. The Germans updated procedures, introduced new keys, and later added an extra rotor for some naval traffic, increasing the challenge again. The fight stayed continuous. Break today's key today, because tomorrow resets everything. Meanwhile, Bletchley Park didn't stay a small team in a few huts. It scaled into an industrial operation. By 1943, thousands of people were working there around the clock. A large share were women handling critical roles, operating machines, managing message traffic, indexing information, translating, and processing results fast enough to be useful. More bombs came online, eventually hundreds of machines across the operation. The goal wasn't to win a puzzle contest. The goal was speed and volume. Get the message, solve it, translate it, interpret it, and deliver it to commanders while it still mattered. At peak capacity, Bletchley was processing an enormous flow of German signals, on the order of thousands of messages a day across different networks. That included U-boat traffic, Army logistics, and Air Force planning. The output became a steady pipeline of insight, where forces were, what they planned, and what they feared. But raw intelligence created a new danger, because if Britain used Ultra too cleanly, too directly, Germany might realize Enigma was compromised. And once Germany suspected that, it could change systems, procedures, or distribution methods fast enough to slam the window shut. So Britain built a discipline around secrecy that sounds almost insane at first. Ultra could not be treated like a magic radar. If Bletchley revealed a U-boat patrol line, commanders didn't just reroute a convoy with no explanation. They tried to build cover, a reason that would make sense from the German point of view. That could mean ordering a patrol plane into the general area so an attack looked like a visual sighting. It could mean having ships conduct visible reconnaissance. It could mean waiting painfully until a move could be justified in a way that didn't scream, "We're reading your mail." This wasn't just a policy, it was survival, because the most valuable intelligence in the war was only valuable as long as the enemy didn't know it existed. And still, for the U-boat war, the biggest payoff required the biggest risk. Getting fresh naval key material, that brings us to one of the most important and most costly captures of the entire conflict. In October 1942, in the Mediterranean, the German submarine U-559 was forced to the surface after being hunted and attacked. As it became clear the boat was going down, British sailors boarded it in an emergency scramble to grab anything useful. Water was flooding in. Time was collapsing. They pulled codebooks and Enigma materials out of the sinking submarine, documents that could unlock naval keys for a crucial stretch of time. In the process, at least 2 of the men involved in retrieving those materials died. The point isn't the cinematic details. The point is what that sacrifice bought: key information that reached Bletchley quickly and helped open naval traffic at exactly the moment the Atlantic fight was reaching its breaking point. And that timing matters, because early 1943 was the crisis season for the Battle of the Atlantic. U-boats were sinking merchant ships at a terrifying rate. Britain depended on shipping for food, fuel, and war supplies. If the sinking stayed high, Britain could be strangled. The math was ugly. Ships lost versus ships built. Cargo delivered versus cargo needed. Now add ultra to that equation, real visibility into where wolf packs were being positioned. Once naval traffic could be read reliably, convoy routing changed from guesswork into strategy. Convoys could be directed around concentrations. Escorts could be strengthened where the risk was real. Anti-submarine forces could be aimed with purpose instead of hope. And almost immediately, the German side noticed something that felt wrong. U-boat headquarters kept planning intercept lines, placing submarines where convoys should pass, only for convoys to appear far away from those lines, like they had been warned. From the German perspective, there were only a few explanations. Unbelievable luck, a spy network of impossible reach, or the unthinkable. Enigma was leaking, but the unthinkable didn't fit their worldview. Their own cryptographic experts insisted the system was secure. The numbers were too large, the procedure was too strict, the machine was too advanced, so they chased other explanations. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic itself, the balance began to tilt. U-boat losses rose. Attacks failed more often. Convoy survival improved. This wasn't the only reason the Allies started gaining the upper hand. Technology, escort tactics, aircraft coverage, radar, and improved anti-submarine methods all played major roles, but code-breaking changed the efficiency of everything else. It turned scattered tools into coordinated pressure. And in May 1943, when German commanders looked at yet another impossible encounter, another convoy dodging a patrol line, another submarine being hunted like it was wearing a beacon, they were staring straight at the truth without accepting it. Britain had not just found a way to crack Enigma once. Britain had built a system to crack it over and over, every day, at scale. And that system, machines, math, captured key material, and thousands of people working in secrecy, was now reaching into the Atlantic War in a way Germany could feel, but still couldn't explain. Next comes the part where this hidden victory collides with public memory, how the results of ultra-shaped major campaigns, and how later movies and pop culture took that story and reassigned the credit. By the time Germany realized something strange was happening in the Atlantic, the damage was already baked in, because Ultra wasn't a single big decode that won one battle. It was a constant advantage that could be applied again and again, quietly, carefully, without letting the enemy know the source. Historians still argue about exactly how much Ultra shortened the war, because war is never just one factor. Industry, manpower, strategy, geography, those are massive. But many historians do agree on one broad point. Reading enemy communications at scale helped the Allies move faster, waste less, and avoid disasters. And, over years, that kind of edge compounds. In North Africa, for example, British commanders often had unusually strong insight into Axis supply problems, fuel, ammo, timing, and how German units were planning to respond. At El Alamein in late 1942, British leadership benefited from a clearer picture of Rommel's situation than would normally be possible in a desert war full of dust and misinformation. Ultra didn't replace fighting. It made fighting smarter. In the Atlantic, the effect was brutally practical. If convoy planners knew where U-boat patrol lines were forming, they could reroute shipping lanes away from the danger. If escorts knew where submarines were expected, they could concentrate protection instead of spreading thin. The results showed up in what mattered most: fewer ships sunk, more cargo delivered, and more U-boats destroyed. Then came the invasion of Western Europe. By 1944, Ultra had matured into a steady strategic tool. Allied planners could sometimes read German assessments, defensive preparations, and logistics. And on the German side, there was still this stubborn belief that Enigma was safe. That belief wasn't naive. It was reinforced by math, by pride, and by the fact that Britain used Ultra with discipline. Germany kept seeing evidence that felt like luck, not a compromised cipher. After the war, that denial got even stronger, because if you are a German signals officer in 1945, accepting the truth means accepting a nightmare. That for years the enemy may have known your positions, your routes, your intentions, sometimes before your own units did. It means admitting that operations failed not just because of mistakes or bad weather, but because the other side was reading your messages. For many people, that's easier to reject than to face. There are accounts of captured Germans being shown decrypted versions of their own wartime communications and still refusing to believe it was real. Not because they were stupid, but because the implications were crushing. Now here's where the story gets twisted for the public. In the year 2000, a major Hollywood film, U-571, put a new version of this history into American living rooms. The movie shows American sailors capturing an Enigma machine from a German submarine, using it to crack Nazi codes, and swinging the Battle of the Atlantic. It's a great setup for a thriller. It's also historically false. In real history, the crucial wartime captures of Enigma materials, especially the ones that helped break naval keys, came from British operations against German submarines, including U-110 in May 1941 and U-559 in October 1942. Those were Royal Navy efforts, and in the case of U-559, men died to get the documents out before the boat went under. The film's central claim, Americans capturing the key Enigma material that broke the Atlantic War, is not supported by the actual record, and the specific submarine in the movie title doesn't rescue it. The real U-571 was sunk later in the war, and not in a way that matches the movie's story. The film used a real designation and built a fictional event around it. What about American captures at sea? The U.S. Navy did capture U-505 in 1944, and that was a major intelligence and morale event. But by then, the Enigma War had already been underway for years. The foundational breakthroughs at Bletchley Park and the key captures that helped unlock naval traffic at the critical time were not American movie scenes. They were British, and they were wrapped in secrecy. The problem is, movies don't just entertain, they teach, sometimes by accident. So when U-571 succeeded financially and won awards, it didn't just make money, it rewired popular memory. Plenty of Americans walked away thinking, "We cracked Enigma." In Britain, the reaction wasn't mild. Veterans and historians called it a theft of history. The controversy reached public debate in the UK, including political criticism because for decades, the people who actually did the work had been forbidden to talk about it. They kept the secret through the war and then kept it for years afterward, even around family. Imagine giving up credit on purpose for half your life, then watching a blockbuster hand the credit to somebody else. Eventually, the filmmakers added a brief acknowledgement in the credits that British forces captured key Enigma materials. But a credit disclaimer is not the same as correcting the story people remember, especially when it flashes by at the end after most viewers have mentally checked out. And this wasn't the only time popular culture narrowed the real story. In 2014, The Imitation Game put Alan Turing back into mainstream awareness, and Turing absolutely deserved recognition as a brilliant figure in the code-breaking effort. But that movie largely downplayed the Polish cryptographers whose pre-war work was essential to making the British breakthrough possible. The Polish team had been attacking Enigma years earlier. They developed mathematical approaches and built early Enigma-breaking devices before Bletchley Park even existed. When Poland fell, they carried their work out of a collapsing country and shared it with allies who could scale it up. One way to put it is simple. Poland provided key intellectual foundations, Britain built an industrial operation around it, and together they unlocked German traffic at the scale needed for war. But movies prefer a single hero, a single lab, a single moment. Real history is usually more crowded, more collaborative, and more uncomfortable. And here's a point that matters for a U.S. the audience. Correcting the Enigma story doesn't mean minimizing America's real contribution to winning Bellevue. America's production, shipping, manpower, and combat power were decisive across multiple theaters. The U.S. Navy and Merchant Marine fought and died in the Atlantic. American air power and industry changed the war's trajectory. None of that needs Enigma credit. The issue is accuracy. Americans did not run Bletchley Park. Americans did not design the bombs. Americans did not staff a 24/7 code-breaking pipeline that processed thousands of German messages day after day for years. That specific invisible war was led by Britain, built on crucial Polish groundwork, and protected by extreme secrecy. And secrecy has consequences, because after 1945, Bletchley Park didn't become a proud national monument overnight. It faded. It was neglected. For years, the people who worked there couldn't even tell their kids what they had done. When the story finally began to be publicly understood after declassification in the decades after the war, it still had to fight for space against louder, simpler narratives. At one point, the site even faced the risk of being lost to redevelopment. Eventually, preservation efforts succeeded, and Bletchley Park became a museum. Visitors can walk the grounds, see the huts, and learn how the machinery and the people fit together. And yes, American tourists go there. Some are surprised when they learn the real history doesn't match what movies taught them. Guides have said that a noticeable share of visitors arrive with some version of the same question. Wait, didn't Americans capture Enigma? That question isn't the visitor's fault. It's what happens when entertainment becomes memory. So here's the clean, factual takeaway. Before the war, Polish mathematicians opened the door by showing Enigma wasn't magic. During the war, British mathematicians and engineers built machines and methods to exploit that weakness fast enough to matter. Thousands of staff turned it into an industrial operation. And at sea, British sailors risked and sometimes lost their lives to capture codebooks and key materials that helped keep naval traffic readable at the most critical moments. Meanwhile, Germany kept transmitting with confidence because their own experts told them the math made Enigma safe. In one of the great ironies of rewrote, Germany's faith in its own technical superiority helped blind it to one of the most devastating intelligence failures in modern military history. And that's the final point. Some victories are loud, tanks, bombs, flags on beaches. Some victories are silent, patterns, wiring diagrams, rotating drums, and exhausted people working in shifts, knowing they can't talk about it, knowing the only reward is that ships will arrive and people won't die. For years, Britain was reading Germany's mail. History should remember who did that work and why it mattered without needing Hollywood to repaint the uniforms.